Schwartz Contracting. Ever since COVID hit, they have been generous enough to let us kind of piggyback off of their Zoom account and let us do these online lectures. Some outside speakers from outside of our area, some speakers inside our area. We've had some pretty good success and some good classes with it. I will issue the training hours. When you guys register on the Zoom account, it automatically gives your email. I will issue you training hours for tonight, so keep an eye out for that. Give me a couple of days to get that information out to you. There are still a lot of people signing in. My name is Jordan Hemker. If you don't know who I am, I work for American Township Fire Department, which butts up to the city of Lima here in Allen County. This is my wife, Brittany, and our 3 dogs. Been in the fire service going on 13 years now. Been kind of all over Ohio as the fire service, so I've got a little bit of a background in working in some cities out in the country and in the suburban setting as well. And like I said, I started Western Buckeye training in 2016. I'm on B shift at American Township. This is our shift logo that we created. We run 2 stations with 8 firefighters on duty, 7-man minimum. At the 2 stations, we cover a little bit of everything, rural to some neighborhoods to some light commercial as well. And we do roughly 3,000 calls or so, maybe just a little shy of that a year. This is our station 1. This is where I am stationed at. So with our staffing, we're dynamic. Our staffing jumps apparatus that's appropriate for the call. So our station 1, obviously the medic crew, we have our heavy rescue, our engine, and then a tanker. So depending on where the call is at and what it is, dictates what we're bringing. So why does this kind of correlate with thermal imaging? Well, anybody in my station can have a thermal imager in their hands, just like probably every other fire station. So it's really important to know the technology we have responding to our scenes, because if we get different eras of a camera on the scene of a fire, whether our organization owns a brand new camera, our organization has cameras that are over 10 years old, or say we go on a mutual aid fire where, you know, in my instance, American, Shawnee, and Lima are all on a fire, we all have different thermal imaging camera brands, eras, and technology. So they all produce a different image, and we have to interpret it differently. And that's our station 2. The guys, they're particularly a Quint crew, the ladder on top of the engine, and they also run a newer thermal imaging camera as well. So depending on what station I'm at dictates, you know, what my job will be if I have a camera in my hand or not. So the objectives of this class is to understand thermal imaging cameras, how they work, why they do what they do, and how we as a firefighter can make some operational decisions based off of the display that the screen is giving. What is the thermal insult? What is the thermal bridging we're seeing? Did my camera change sensitivity modes? You know, if these are things you've never heard of with thermal imaging camera, hopefully we can kind of clear some of those unknowns up. Like anything else, teaching in the fire service, please revert back to your owner's manual, train on your equipment, just giving you tidbits of things that are out there when it comes to cameras and technology. But at the end of the day, this is technology. It might fail on you, so you got to revert back to your firemanship skills, you know, doing proper searches, making the good scene size up 360 with our human eye, and understanding that one of the biggest downfalls to an imager is the batteries. You know, if a battery dies on you quickly, can I go back to my natural firefighter skills of doing the basics? So why is thermal imaging important on the fire scene? It gives us a totally different view of what is going on. So our camera allows us to see where the fire is at. We can quickly identify flow paths, open doors, fires in walls, things like that. Again, thermal imaging is nothing new in the fire service. It's been around since before I was even thought about becoming a firefighter. But our technology has changed drastically here in the last 12 to 15 years. we're fighting the fire faster. We're fighting victims faster. There was a study done. It was a Australian gentleman came over to the United States, and he did an evaluation of the American Fire Service and how do they implement thermal imaging cameras into our operations. And New York City, I'm sorry, it was Chicago, somewhere out in California, and a couple other smaller organizations. They all did studies and searches and training programs, and they all came up with this data that we're finding victims faster. We're finding the fire faster. And, these are all things that we have all seen personally with our use of thermal imaging cameras. One of the biggest things I think the cameras allows us to do is give us a line of sight. We're doing a good building layout. I know where my stairs are at quickly. I know which way the door swings, inward to the right, inward to the left. I'm finding the hallways faster. Cameras are so good today, you can read the numbers of a apartment building or a hallway when you're going up to that room. With all this great ideas and skills and theories and all that jazz, we are still having 38% of our firefighters with no thermal imaging camera in their hands. And it's, I think it's a lack of knowledge with thermal imaging camera, a lack of culture within your own organization with thermal imaging camera. It's sometimes they're not viewed as a part of your PPE or a part of your equipment. A thermal imaging camera is a tool, and it's giving us the upper hand in our fire behavior understanding and seeing what's going on. So we should be coming off the truck with these, going around teaching some places, and even my own volunteer organization. At one time, we didn't have a thermal imaging camera in the truck. It was actually in the compartment, and then we had to open up the big Pelican box, turn the thing on, and that's when we used the thermal imaging camera. So the problem with that is the mindset of a camera, probably in the early 90s, give or take, when it was brand new, was you used it for search and rescue and overhaul. And most of the time, you didn't pull it off for a search, you used it for the overhaul. And I'm hoping that has changed here within the last few years of the fire service. So some of the groups that have helped contribute to a lot of the stats, statistics, and the science to thermal imaging cameras, obviously UL, FSRI, they're doing all the fire studies with transitional attacks, victim survivability, all that stuff. And then the other group is NIOSH. When NIOSH comes in and does a study or a report, usually it's for a significant event, a line of duty death, something along those lines. You always have the NIOSH top 5: lack of communication, lack of command and control, lack of training, all the usual top 5 you see. Something that a lot of people don't know is typically number 6 will do something along with thermal imaging cameras, not understanding how the camera works, relying on the camera too much, not even having it in their hands at all. These are all things that are noted in these line of duty deaths, and we can do better, because it's usually that thing is sitting right in front of the officer's seat, or it's sitting in the back of the guys running backwards. Cameras are so good and small today that every individual firefighter may have one in an organization. So we need to be utilizing this technology to make us more intelligently aggressive firefighters. So who uses thermal imaging cameras? It started with the United States military. Like anything else in the fire service, we always get the hand-me-downs of the military. Thermal imaging technology, we've known about it for many, many, many years. The problem, though, was the military sat on it for so long. The technology that we got in the 90s with the first cameras was actually technology the military had in the 1970s. And so they finally released it for public use. And by the time it was out, that technology was 30-some years old. For most of the guys that are seasoned in this class, if you guys got your first camera at your fire department, I'm sure it cost probably $25,000 and weighed 100 pounds. Think about where we're at today. So the military is the biggest reason why that thermal imaging is available to the fire service. And it's not only used, these are some of the examples of the first cameras that came out in the fire service. I don't know if anybody had the old Carnes helmet mount. I've heard some pretty awesome stories about that particular camera. And then this one on the right, the Scott, that was at my volunteer department up until about 2-3 years ago, that was a frontline thermal imaging camera for our organization. So obviously our technology's changed. It's condensed. We're getting better images and things like that. So the study where it said we're finding victims 70% faster was based off of mid 90s to early 2000s technology. And that was this stuff right here. So where should we be at today? Should be about 100%. Thermal imaging is not only used for the fire service, it's used in the industrial setting as well. In Lima, we have a lot of refineries, refinery complexes, chemical plants, things like that. They use thermal imaging for monitoring systems and things of that nature. They're able to see flows if things are changing, machinery's not running efficient, and able to make sure that things are running as they should be. So there's a huge misunderstanding in the fire service of thermal imaging cameras. This particular camera is what we call an industrial grade camera. So what this does, this is basically like a homeowner inspection would use if you had someone doing an energy efficiency study of your home. These are the cameras that they're operating with. These cameras, we are able to change what we're looking for. Whereas a fire service camera, the FLIRs, the MSAs, things like that, they're one and done. I turn it on, point, aim, and shoot, and I create an image. I can't change any of the parameters that I'm looking for. I can't change moisture in the room. I can't change the emissivity, which we'll talk about what emissivity is. I can't change the distances that I'm looking for as well. So the problem though is, this isn't a dig on fire chiefs, but they see something that costs $100, $200 at Granger, and they think it's going to work in a fire. That's not the realities that we live in with these. We have to do our homework when we're buying a thermal imaging camera. Oh, one of the turnarounds that we worked at a part-time job called Santa Fe, the chemical plant that was having us in during COVID times, we had to check our temperatures. So they bought they rented, I believe, a thermal imaging camera, this one right here. So when we would come into the office, we would have to check our temps. Well, there was a huge misconception within the fire service that we were using these our ticks, our fire service ticks, to check our body temps, and that's not you can't do that, because the way these things read is totally different. This camera was fine-tuned for reading the human body. If you dive into understanding how they take temperatures with thermal imaging camera, if you look in the picture of my face, there's a triangle right by my eye. That was a tear duct. The tear duct of the human eye is the most natural skin. That's not thick, it's not covered, doesn't have a lot of sweat molecules, things like that on there. That's the most accurate portion of your body to take a temperature with a thermal imaging camera. A fire service tick is basically telling us, hey, this is what I think the temperature is. It's not a fine, minute reading because of the parameters that the camera is set at. If we could go in and change what we're looking for, then we would be able to do really fine, minute temperature checks like this right here. So what's our camera looking for? It's looking for infrared energy, and infrared is in a wavelength. Compared to light, we can't see this type of wavelength. If you guys are in a pretty decent smoke charged hallway, a bedroom, something like that, and you turn your flashlight on, what happens? Probably creates that really nice glow. You can't see, it makes the room a lot worse. Well, that's because light can't penetrate through those particles in the smoke, whereas the wavelength of infrared is faster, it's thinner, and it's able to penetrate through smoke, and that's where our cameras pick it up. Again, going back to understanding the difference between a fire service camera and industrial camera, we have 3 different subcategories of infrared energy. You have a shortwave infrared, medium wave infrared, and a long wave infrared. The only infrared information your camera is picking up is called long wave infrared energy. And that's a big thing to understand. Where fire service cameras are only long wave, industrial cameras are reading these 2 other smaller wavelengths down below. We can't change in between those with our FLIRs, our MSAs, our bullards, as compared to the industrial cameras I showed. So infrared, like I said, we can't see it. It is felt as heat. and it goes across our electromagnetic spectrum. This is the stuff in high school that I failed at terribly, and now it's coming back to haunt me. So the electromagnetic spectrum is this little graph right here. And as you guys can see, here's visible light. Let me know, Corey, let me know if you can see the lines I'm drawing. So there's visible light. This is what we're seeing every day, right? And then here's your infrared energy, and it's just below. So it doesn't take much for us to leave the visible light spectrum to the infrared. And I have an example of what you guys can show at your station with your crews if you wanted to talk about some thermal imaging camera theories and concepts. What I really like about infrared is it's really close to my human eye. I lose it for a little bit, and then I can start making hot pockets with my microwave wavelengths. So I actually did this today in the firehouse. I stopped in and made this quick video. So this is a demonstration you can do about how quickly, when something is heated up, how it leaves the human eye spectrum and goes to the infrared spectrum. So I took this torch, I started to heat the nail up till it got cherry red. That's the human eye spectrum of heat, energy, things being emitted as light. And then as it cools off, it slowly loses that cherry red glow, and then it turns into just the normal color. And now we're in the infrared spectrum. It happened that quick. So think about some of your fire rooms, things like that, things that are heated up. You know, we saw that the heat source we put onto that nail, we may not see the heat source that's going on inside of a house, inside of an industrial complex, but we should still know there's heat in this room. There's information in this room we can't see with our human eye. Let's use another form to see what's going on. So this is the nail. After we let it cool down for a little bit, it went from the human eye visibility to the thermal eye. You know, had we have not known that this room was already preheated, pre-charged, this is why nothing showing means nothing. It's still giving off some type of thermal information. How many times would you walk by something and not see any signs of it being hot? And then we continue our investigation. So that camera is just giving us one extra element to our investigation skills, to our decision-making skills. We talked about shortwave, medium wave, and long wave infrared information. Right here's our fire service cameras. Anywhere between 8 to 13. FLIR cameras, they're actually at 7 to 14. Other brands do other things as well, but we utilize long wave infrared energy. So we stop right here, and this is all that we're seeing, that a room that's on fire is giving off, what that nail was giving off, or anything like that. But what about this other portion of the information that's actively being emitted that we can't see even with our camera? We're only seeing a small portion of a thermal insult. We're only seeing a small portion of it. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes of the camera that's giving you an image. So hopefully that gives you a different appreciation of what that camera is really doing for us. Again, we're only seeing 2/3 of the heat, but this is giving us a different perspective and a different tactical advantage of how to attack this fire, look for victims, shut off your flow paths and things like that. For the camera to pick up infrared energy, we have to have what we call emitters. So we have 3 of those. We have an active emitter, which is like the human body, some of that terrible paramedic stuff, homeostasis, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit is what our body strives to produce. So we're constantly giving some type of heat signature. A passive emitter would be something that absorbs heat, doesn't produce its own. So like the chair I'm sitting in, the burn room that you're in is absorbing that heat, and then it starts to emit that energy that it absorbed off. And then a direct heat source would be a body of fire, the sun, things like that. One of the exercises you guys probably do quite a bit, if you have a dog and pony show, if you have the kids come to the firehouse, probably not right now in COVID times, but if you have a special event, you can show people, hey, this is how the camera works. You know, you show, hey, your hand looks like this with the camera, and then you remove your hand and you have that signature that's in there. The problem with this is in the fire service, thermal imaging cameras, from day one still up to today, we use the grayscale for majority of our operations. So that grayscale has a range depending on what camera, what brand you have, anywhere 0 to 300, let's say. As a human being, you're going to show up white as hot on the camera. You're the hottest thing in the room. My room right now is, 60 some degrees, feels like 100 while speaking to you guys, but I'm going to show up on the camera white as hot. The issue is years and years of training in the firehouse, years and years of training in acquired structures with no live fire, we create bad muscle memory training scars because we're constantly looking for a victim that's going to show up white as hot on the camera. When we go into the fire or we go into the thermal insult, it flips on us. Our victims are the coldest thing in the room and the fire's the hottest. So the victims are going to show up as a dark color on the camera. But if we've trained for 25 years showing up white as hot, what kind of training scars do we create? Are we really looking for what we think we're looking for? So how do we get this image? I'm going to try and keep the jargon fireman simple. The sensor inside the camera, you can call it a sensor detector, whatever you want it to be. The technical term is called a focal plane array. And that is the actual device that sits in the camera where the infrared energy makes contact with, and it creates excitement. It's an electrical signal, and then it gets converted into a display. So what does that mean? Well, it basically says I can show you the difference in temperatures with contrast, hot and cold. If I'm in a room and I'm 98.6 degrees and the wall is 98.6 degrees, what happens? The person disappears. They blend into the background. I got to have a difference between hot and cold. I have to have contrast inside of there. If we don't have contrast, we don't have a target or a background. So how does this work? So you target background, your fire room, whatever you're pointing your camera at, gives off its infrared energy. The infrared energy is a squiggly line right here. It goes through the lens of the camera. That glass-looking lens on the face of the camera is called geranium. Infrared penetrates through the geranium, and then it hits the sensor, the detector, the focal plane array, whatever you want to call it. So then the infrared energy, the infrared waves, hits this device right here, starts to get excited, creates an electrical signal, goes through a computer process, and then hits your display. That's how the image is produced. So basically, think of it kind of like spectrum cable coming into your house. The wires that brings the information is the infrared energy. It comes into your house and it hits your cable box. Your cable box is the detector, creates excitement, creates a signal, goes through the TV, gets processed, and then now you're watching your TV show. That is how a thermal imaging camera works. That's how the infrared energy works. The sensor itself is called a microbolometer. I don't expect anybody to remember that, but this is what the military gave to us a few years back. The beauty of having the military invest and put money into this technology was the fire service didn't have to do that much. The civilian world didn't have to do that much with this. This made our cameras smaller. It made our cameras more handheld. It made our cameras faster, more accurate. And we had very little investment on the civilian side to do this. So this is a sensor that came out of a Bullard camera. My fire department switched from Bullard to FLIR probably 2-3 years ago. And I begged and pleaded the chief. Our Bullards were end of life. They were done. They were no good. I begged and pleaded him, man, let me take this thing apart. This is the actual sensor that costs all that money. It's this little gray box right here. The infrared energy hits that gray box and creates the excitement, goes through the amplification process, and then turns into your nice orange, reds, grayscale. Can tell you if you have a victim 10 feet in the room or not. Now, if you took this this sensor and went under a microscope, you're going to see these lines right here. I'm basically going to draw a tic-tac-toe. You would see something that looks like this. So what that is those are called pixels. Those are little sensors within the detector itself. So the infrared energy would come into the camera and hit one of these little squares and create information. So imagine a room that's 300, 400, 200, 600 degrees. That infrared energy is going to come in and create that information. And then this is sending the signal throughout the camera, through the computer, and it's going to create the image that correlates with the information that is produced. So we'll go a little bit of detail about resolution and things like that and how that correlates with a better camera. This is what the pixels would look like as well inside of there. Each one of these is a little heat flux gauge. It's reading information, giving you detail. The more of these I have, the better off my camera is. And that's why it's so important to pay attention to your specs when you're purchasing a camera. Just another example of a microbolometer picture. So when we're interpreting the image, you know, what are we looking for? We're looking for grayscales. We're looking for the color schemes, details within the room. I really caution you on this stuff right here. Don't get sold on tricks and gimmicks. The cameras that are coming out that are you know, the $1,000, $1,200, you get what you pay for. So this particular brand, this is the K2. Like I said, a lot of companies make fire service cameras and industrial grade cameras. Well, then they make a blend of the technology. This particular camera has MSX, which is a digital camera overlapping a thermal imaging camera. If you take a K2, well, let's go back. If you take a normal fire service camera and you look out a window, you should see a reflection because it doesn't penetrate through glass. You take a K2 and you look through the front bay door, the glass door, and you see traffic driving down Main Street. That's because you have a digital camera that is producing an image and the thermal camera is overlapping it. The problem is when you cross into the threshold of a smoky fire environment, what happens to your digital camera? It's no good. It disappears. So now you're relying on a low spec, low end camera, and it produces a lack for better terms, a poor image because of the poor specs. So we have to know what we're buying, what we're looking into. Resolution, this basically tells us or gives us the most detail, the most abilities to see far into a room with detail. Like I said, each one of those pixels is a little heat detector. It gives us the most accurate temperatures that our room can provide, or that the camera can provide as well. So kind of like when you buy the iPhone 12 or whatever number they're on now, they always talk about, you know, I have a, you know, a 1200 megapixel camera, whatever it is. The more pixels you have within the camera, the better off the image is going to be. So with the resolution, the size of the sensor, the microbolometer, there's different types that are out there. You can get a 320 by 240, which is what we would call a high-end spec camera, or anywhere between the 80 by 60 to 160 by 120. So what that means is I can make tactical decisions. I'm just going to put a D there for decision making, and then I'm going to put an S right here for situational awareness. This camera here is going to tell me where exactly my convective currents are coming from, where the fire's at, where I need to put my hose line, where my victims are. These cameras here is going to tell me, hey, it's kind of warm in here, and I think the fire is over here in this direction. It's all about the spec of the cameras you buy. Not saying these are bad. I think every fireman should have a camera, but I think every decision-making unit within the fire department that's on scene should be having at least one of these bigger cameras. Something that a lot of people don't know is your thermal imaging cameras will have to switch sensitivity modes. So what does that mean? Think about how if you wake up at 2 in the morning for an EMS call and you're going out in the hallway and you have your night lights on that are super bright, what do your eyes do? They have to adjust. So think of the camera switching sensitivity modes as your eyes adjust, and the eye of the camera has to adjust to what's going on. As the camera takes on heat, it changes how it produces the image. It changes how accurate it is. It changes how fast the ability of it is to create the image. So there's times where that camera reaches the max capacity of gear number 1. So it's got to switch to gear number 2, and that's when the camera switches modes. Most cameras will have a two sensitivity modes, and some have 3. There's only a handful that have 3. So most of them in my area are 2. So NFPA 1801 came out in 2010. It was revised in 2013, and it should be coming up here pretty soon for a revision. So NFPA 1801, when a camera, if you have a camera that is built after 2010 and it's built to the standards or the metrics of NFPA, you guys notice in the background the green triangle in the top left-hand corner. If you see that triangle in the top corner of your camera, you switch sensitivity modes. Your camera is working at a higher rate of speed. It's telling you, hey, I'm taking some heat. I got to change how I'm producing this image. And there are some things that we miss when the camera switches modes that we have to pay attention to. So if you have a camera prior to 2010, before the NFPA standard, your camera could do whatever the brand wanted to do. There was no set way. MSA used to go from, they had an H and an L for high sensitivity, low sensitivity. One would go from green to blue, and you would never know what that meant. Some would have an M in the top, which I'll show you a video of, and that changes colors, and that was it. So you have to know what your camera does. Cameras go from a high to a low sensitivity. So this is an example of a camera that is switching sensitivity modes. This was a training burn that we did out west, and I'll play it a couple times so you guys can see some of the details. This is an MSA 6000, and I know Lieutenant Locke from Lima, I know that you guys run MSA 6000s, so this would be something that you guys would see on your camera. So right now, this particular camera, it's seeing color, it's seeing the red in low sensitivity, or I'm sorry, in a high sensitivity mode. And when it switches modes, you're going to see all of this red go away. We didn't put water on the fire. We didn't change anything. This looks pretty bad right now. When the camera flips modes, you will instantly know. There was no water put onto the seat of the fire or in that simulated hallway. The camera flipped sensitivity modes. It said, hey, I can't produce this good, clean image for you anymore. I got to change how I'm doing it. I'm going to change my gears. So now we went from, let's just, for an example, 300 degrees was grayscale. We flipped sensitivity modes, and now 500 degrees is gray. It's producing the image differently. The MSA 6000, when it flips sensitivity modes, you will not see color again until you're close to 1,000 degrees. Be mindful of that with this particular camera. This is a Bullard camera. This was another training that we did. We're already in sensitivity mode switch. Look at the detail right now. Up high, our convective currents are moving through the doorway. We can see we have a crib in the room, and our camera flipped back to a low sensitivity, and the detail changed dramatically. So I brought the camera back up. For it to switch sensitivity modes, we have to change how we're producing the image. We have to change how we're processing things. I'm going to swing back over, and I'm going to drop back down to a low sensitivity. And look how the detail changes. Increases dramatically. We want to try and keep our cameras in a low sensitivity for the longest time, for the most detail, the most accuracy. This could be the difference between seeing a victim, deep into a room, finding the crib right away, and those types of details in our searches. Another way you can create that difference or that change, you can look at your partner, your firefighter partner, that's next to you. Look at the floor, put some water on the floor with your nozzle, and then have it change because it'll sense that temperature difference. We talked about Finley, talked about a different video. Finley Fire Department did a huge study on their cameras not too long ago, and they were running an Argus. It was an older Argus. This green M in the middle was their sensitivity mode. This is prior to 2010 camera. So that was telling them when their cameras switched sensitivity modes. And that particular brand, that camera ran 3 sensitivity modes: high, medium, and low. They no longer, they have FLIRs now. So FLIRs, a FLIR camera, 18% of the overall pixels, so 18% of all those little squares I drew out, if they see a 300 degrees or more, they're switching sensitivity modes. MSA, if 32% of those little squares sees 270 degrees, they're flipping sensitivity modes. And again, they will not show color until after 1,000 degrees in that different sensitivity mode. And then bollards are the ones that flip the fastest, 3% over 230 degrees. So one of the biggest issues in the fire service is we rely on this number way too much on our thermal imaging cameras. We need to be relying on what the environment is telling us. What are the color schemes telling us? There are camera switch sensitivity modes and all those things. The reason why we cannot worry about or read the digital number itself, because every camera, this is what the sensor looks like, right? Depending on what brand you have, this isn't dictated in NFPA or anything. There might be a special, so if you look right here, you see the green square. That green square correlates on a specific point on the heat detector inside the camera. So whatever that green square points at might be these boxes that's giving the information. It's just an approximate temperature. It is not accurate. It is not a 100%. This is 668 degrees. This is, I think, the relevant temperature of that area is 666 degrees or 688, whatever that camera is telling us. The other thing we have to incorporate or think of is our distance to spot ratio. So what that means is however far away I am, I have to assume that I'm taking in outside information of the camera. So here's my target, this window right here. What's going to be more accurate? My camera at this point or my camera all the way out here? What's taking in the infrared energy? The one that's closest is going to be the most accurate. So we have to be cautious of these factors inside of our cameras. And these are all specs you have to pay attention to when you're buying your camera. Thermal imaging cameras, they read surface temperatures. They do not read the gases, anything like that. Those are in different, those are a totally different industrial grade camera that reads the temperatures of convective gases. When you see those currents, when I showed the video of the camera flip sensitivity modes and the crib was in there, you were seeing gases rolling through the room. Those are convective currents. Whatever those currents are heating up is the temperature you're reading. So if it's the doorway, the hallway, things like that, that's the temperatures that you're reading. If you see fast moving gases, fast moving currents, you need to assume that you are either near a flow path, in a flow path, and there's fire following behind it, because it's going to be going from those pressure changes, the highs to the lows, the things that we change as we're progressing through our fire attack, our searches, or forcing the front door, anything like that. We have to rely on the color palette that the camera is producing. So this is the MSA 6000. Again, watch this, I call it the gray wave, which I probably picked up from somebody else teaching this. So you see the gray wave right here on the camera. You need to assume that there's something else following behind it. So our camera is in a high sensitivity, switches modes, we lose our color. The gray wave is right there, and we know there's fire blowing behind it. We need to assume that the fire is going to be producing itself very quickly. So how do we fix that? We cut the fire off, shut the door, rip the door off the hinges, close the ways, the doorway, the hallway, whatever it might be, or flow water, preferably flow water. These are the three gases that the thermal imaging camera is going to pick up and read: the convective currents. And the reason why we're only able to see these three gases is because we talked about earlier the long wave infrared energy. This is the only gases that falls in that 7 to 14 pitch range that our cameras are set to read. When I turn that camera on, point, aim, and shoot, this is what we're looking at. So all this information about thermal imaging cameras, how they produce an image, how they read, the gas, all that stuff, you can look up yourself on the NIST technical note 1499, was done in the mid 2000s. And they just did kind of a smaller version of this test with the modifier behavior burns that they did in Ohio a few years back. So that information is also out as well. If you turn your camera on and you hear this clicking noise, it'll go click, click, or you'll hear it kind of stutter a little bit, or you might see your camera freeze. That's called the shutter. The camera is supposed to do that. The shutter is really important because it helps calibrate the camera. It helps change sensitivity modes. It's allowing it to take a breath of the atmosphere and reread, reset itself. So depending on what standard area your camera in, 30, 60 seconds, and what the environment is doing. If it's a super hot environment, the camera might shutter frequently. It just is doing what it's doing. When the camera shutters, when the shutter fires, you're going to hear the click, click. You're going to see a freeze in the screen, usually 1 to 2 seconds, and then the image will start right back up. The problem is the spec. What camera did I buy? If you bought a higher end decision-making camera, you have a megahertz processor of 60, where if you bought a decision-making camera, the K2, you have a 9 megahertz processor. Well, what does that mean? Well, if you read the specs of your TV in your living room, I guarantee you have a higher megahertz processing on that TV, so it produces the fastest, cleanest image when it's coming in through your digital cable box. It's the same concept and idea for your thermal imaging camera. So this is an example of what a shutter does. It sits right behind the geranium lens and in front of the sensor, the heat sensor of your camera. And then every so often it gets a signal to fire off, and then that vane just covers the sensor and then opens right back up. And this is just an example of it. Just like that, that's the shutter. The issue with the shutter is when this thing fires and you have that delay of 1 to 2 seconds, it stops bringing the image in. How fast are we scanning with our thermal imaging camera? If it's like me, I'm moving with a pace, I'm moving with a purpose to get in and out, I'm moving very quickly with my scans, and my camera fires, I might miss that victim for the 1 2 seconds that I scanned over the doorway, the hallway, whatever. Maybe I missed their arm when my camera is shuttered and was delayed for that 1 to 2 seconds. So you have to do a methodical scan with your camera. So emissivity is the ability of something to give off and emit infrared energy. It's kind of like anything in the fire service, you know, everything from 0 to a 1 is kind of how we rate, like if something mixes with water or not, or is lighter than air or not. So emissivity can have a value from 0 to 1. 0 being something shiny like stainless steel appliances, really nice glossy floors, roofs, things like that, metal roofs. And then 1 is a black body, or what we call a natural body. Human skin is the closest thing to a 1 that we would probably look at. So this is the ability of something to give off the most true thermal information. It's kind of like the idea of if I'm wearing a black t-shirt versus a white t-shirt when I'm sitting outside in the summertime, who's going to be cooler, the white t-shirt or the black t-shirt? It's the same thing. It's giving off its true energy. How is it absorbing the heat? So emissivity is a factor or a variable in industrial grade camera that I would change what my camera is looking at or looking for to create the most accurate image. So say I'm looking at stainless steel, usually that's 0.31 for emissivity ratings. So I would change my camera parameters to 0.31. If you know your camera very well at the fire station, you know you can't change your emissivity factors. Our cameras are set typically at 0.95 to 0.98 is where our cameras are set at. So be mindful of that. So if you are going to an appliance fire, you go to an industrial fire, something along those lines, what am I looking at, and is it truly giving off its thermal identity? This is not my picture. I grabbed this one off the internet. You can Google search thermal imaging cameras, and this is probably one of the most popular ones. This particular person hand is showing up warm on this camera, and his ring is showing up cold. But we all know that the human body is 98.6 degrees. This thing's been on his finger for forever. It's probably been in his pocket. That we all know that ring should be warmer than what it's shown on the camera. That's what emissivity does to us. It's not giving off its true information. So an easy example you can do, maybe your fire chief may not appreciate this. I did this one at home. My wife didn't appreciate this one, that's for sure. We were out back grilling, and I had some demo cameras with me, and I was like, man, I'm going to try this. So this is my grill. We're grilling out, stainless steel appliance. Is this truly 111 degrees right now? You can read the charbroil with the camera. Camera flip sensitivity modes, and it gives off the true identity of there. It's actually on fire, and I ruined this grill. And I said, hey, put that fire out, please. And then I realized the propane was still on. It was still feeding the fire. So I rusted that thing out for no reason. But a good teaching point, needless to say. We have to understand what our camera is doing and the specs and the metrics of it. It's just like auto extrication. You guys know if your tools can cut super ultra high strength steels or not. We know the details of our equipment. So we talked about 1801 a little bit. This standardized a lot of things with our cameras. If you guys notice, if you buy a new camera today, it has a green button. NFPA 1801 said you had to do that. Cameras should be recertified every 5 years, sent off to a third party to get recalibrated, and it has the abilities to have downloadable firmware software from the internet. This gives us abilities. They say to have a 2-hour battery runtime, but in all honesty, the fire service is terrible with batteries. It is what it is. They sit on a trickle charger. They go up, they go down, they go up, they go down all the time. The one thing that 1801 did do, and it's a good thing, is they created what we call TI basic mode. So anytime you turn your camera on, if it's NFPA certified or built to the metric of NFPA certified cameras, the camera automatically turns on to TI basic, thermal imaging basic. So what that means is it's a happy medium between fire attack and search and rescue. If you have the MSA 6000, the FLIR, the Bullard, you can change what your camera is looking for. You can change search and rescue mode, fire attack mode, thermal throttle, things like that. They prefer you to stay in this one, is why they created it. So we talked about the button. The standardized are gray colors, things like that. Your cameras have a overheat indicator. Oh boy, what did I just do? Here we go. Sorry about that. Our cameras have a overheat indicator inside, so it has its own detector inside. When the core temperature reaches a certain threshold, the camera will shut down on its own. It'll give you an alarm in the background, and it says, hey, I'm getting ready to turn off. Don't really foresee that happening in a fire environment, because if that camera's shutting down, you might be in a bad spot. When you are looking at your camera, NFPA 1801, new cameras after 2010, 13 era, all of this, the way that this camera is laid out is dictated by the standard. The color graph is going to be in the right-hand corner along with a digital readout. Your battery has to be somewhere in the middle of the camera display. And then any of your operational modes that you can change manually will be on the left-hand side. That is a standard. All cameras will be that way if it's built to the 1801 metric. The reason why they did that was because they realized the fire service had so many different eras of cameras and people were doing whatever they wanted. They want it to be standardized. So if I went to a mutual aid fire and I picked up a Lima Fire camera, I know green means on, and I know that these colors mean this. And I, regardless of what the brand was, they wanted to get rid of some confusion. NFPA 1408. This one's kind of important to understand. This came out in 2015. This kind of gives some documentation of training policy procedures, what people who are teaching thermal imaging need to teach. And it also states that if you have a new hire, a rookie, whatever it is, that they shall, and if you hear the word shall in something, it's usually legally binding, you shall train them to your camera's operations. And if they are killed in line of duty and there's a camera in their hand and they weren't properly trained on it, you're putting yourself in a bad spot as an organization. So standardize our trainings and our modes, our colorizations, and temp measurement, which is all the things that we've hit already. So some of the specs you're looking at: field of view, how wide is the camera itself when it opens up? So field of view would be something versus this. How much of the background am I bringing in? Sensitivity modes, how many do I have? When do they switch? Resolution, how nice is the sensor itself? Is that 320 by 240 or a 160 by 180? How quick is it bringing the information inside? The refresh rate, a 9 megahertz versus a 60 megahertz. Distance to spot ratio, how accurate am I? Distance from my target. The emissivity rating, that 0.95 is usually what you're looking for. Over temp failures, and is this thing intrinsically safe? What I mean by that is if I'm in a natural gas leak, if I'm in an environment that can explode, is the electronics inside this camera going to make me blow up? 1801 requires them to be intrinsically safe. So like I talked about, we have two types of cameras: situational awareness and the decision making. We talked pretty hard on that one. Those are just some examples of them. MSA came out with the G1. They have the ones that are integrated into the your pass alarm readout, and you get what you get. Just remember that these are, hey, there's a fire over here in the corner. Situational awareness, I think I'm in a bedroom type situations there. Thermal contrast. So this is basically the ability to read very minute temperatures. This is a difference between seeing a crack in the floor versus a bunch of squiggly lines. So the lower your NETD ratings are, the more cleaner your image is going to be. So typically our cameras in the fire service are at like a 45. So we're doing pretty good. So this was the metrics that UL NIST did in their technical note. So now we're all experts on how thermal imaging cameras operate. So operational modes, these are the ones that we can change on our cameras. I really recommend not doing this if you're fire attack search. Stay with whatever the camera originally turns on with, that TI basic. Because the problem is MSA 6000, Lieutenant Locke, your guys' camera, you have what's called, I don't know if I have it on here, my thing's hiding it. They have what's called black as hot mode. The issue with that is we just flipped what we've always been trained on for how many years, and maybe we didn't realize we did that. The buttons got hit crawling down the hallway, whatever it might be. In the fire service, we need to know what grayscale is, what orange means, what yellow mean, or what yellow, orange, and red means. And you start getting these really nice, pretty color palettes, we go away from what we're usually used to. Red means fire in my mind. So if I see red, that's bad. I'm seeing all kinds of different colors right here. One thing I like about the MSA 6000 is they have a built-in laser pointer and a range finder inside of it. So you can kind of tell your guys and gals when they're crawling on the hallway, hey, you have a bedroom, you have a door 29 feet to the left. Kind of gives them an idea of what they're crawling to and what they're doing. So what's a tick going to do? It's going to allow you to see the area you're working in, gives you line of sight. This cuts down our search times. We're finding stairs faster. We're finding bedrooms faster. We're finding victims faster. We're finding the fire faster. We're more efficient in our scenes. The biggest thing, scene size up 360. Our main goal was locate the seat of the fire. This is assisting us to that ability. We already talked about it. We don't see through glass. We don't see through those mediums as well. If you have a puddle of water, it's going to look really squiggly and nasty, and you might see a reflection on the ground. Or if you are in a kitchen and you see a reflection of a fire, you know, that's coming off of your stainless steel appliances. We don't see through furniture. We don't see through walls, none of that stuff. What we see is the heat that's transferred. If you were to look at a wall, you would see the studs. The studs would be thermal bridging. They're absorbing heat, and they're giving off their thermal energy. The rafters are doing the same thing under the house. Masking is something that UL NIST discovered in their basement study. Essentially, they had a decent fire burning underneath the floor. Their temperatures were significant, as you can see, and then they looked at the thermal imaging camera, and this is all they were seeing right here, 75, 73 degrees. So the idea or the point here is don't rely on your camera for everything. We still have to use our situational awareness with our human eye, our natural abilities, and our skills, because you might think the tick is telling you it's good to go, and carpet can hide a lot, and then now you're taking a ride to the basement. So this was a crawl space fire that I had experienced, and we had masking in this. It was run in the crawl, and you can see the multiple layering of floors that are right here. Wood floor, whatever, I can't remember what this even was. It was thick. And then over here, we had a layer of carpet. This whole room was charged with smoke at one point. We couldn't find the fire. We didn't know what was going on. So the cameras we used to our assistance to try and find it. So be aware, use good thinking, critical thinking skills in these scenarios here. We all know that everyone follows the building code. You know, you might find multiple layers of roofing, things like that. If you're going up to cut a hole, is the camera telling you true information? You know, there are limitations to this stuff. My friend Chris Kessinger sent me these pictures of a roof drill they did. I'm sure everyone's seen drop ceiling, probably have in your firehouse right now. Drop ceiling it can be a fireman killer very quickly. Your thermal imaging camera is not going to see through the tiles, right? We already established that. So if you go to a Dollar General, you go to a supermarket store, you know, mini strip mall, whatever it might be, you know, use your investigation skills, recreate damage that's worthy of the call. Working fire is going to get working fire damage. Smells and bells, I'm going to slow my roll a little bit. If it's a working fire, I'm ripping this entire grid system down and getting it out of the way. If we're smells and bells, you know, multiple alarms, maybe a bad ballast, I want to make sure I don't have anything burning above me. I'm going to take my hook, pop the tile, move it over to the left, move it to the right, whatever it is I need to do. Really think about storage areas, Dollar Generals. I always talk about Dollar General because every town has one. You know, right here we have a large open space. You know, where do you think the drop ceiling is going to sit? Probably somewhere here, right? But if you notice this back wall, it doesn't go all the way to the roof. That's a partition wall. So think about Dollar General, Family Video, whatever it might be. Here's the storage room. Here's your open space, and my drop ceiling sitting, you know, somewhere right here. Where's that fire have traveled to? Everywhere, all day. We need to make sure that we're not crawling underneath the fire that's extending. So using critical thinking skills, we remove the tile, we use our camera to look for the convective currents, the fire itself, you know, whatever is being produced. Thermal inversion, like we said earlier, as a human being, I am the warmest thing in the room, and then we're going to do a search for training, it's going to show up white as hot. So thermal inversion is the idea of right now this pop can at work is the coldest thing in the room. And it's showing up black because it's cold. That's how the camera reads. And then I throw it into the freezer, and guess what? It is now the warmest thing in the coldest environment. So we have to to make sure our minds are thinking in the right mentality. Just some simple questions. Where is my tick on my truck? Do I keep it in front of the officer seat? Is it easily accessible for my crew to get a hold of? Do I have to go open a compartment door, turn it on, put a battery in? All that stuff. Who needs a thermal imaging camera? Most places, everybody needs one, in my opinion, but some places are limited. Is it going to the company officer? Is it going to the most senior member? Do you have to prioritize who's getting it by what task they're completing on the fire scene? Are they doing a search? Are they doing a tack? Are they doing an event? Who needs a camera at that particular moment? One of the bigger things is, how do I attach it to myself? That's something that I'm trying to change, how I attach my camera to myself with my gear. I'm trying to go away from the retractable lanyards and a more secured strap or something like that. I've been kind of playing around with that. What kind of car are we going to? In my opinion, don't matter what call you're going to, the camera needs to come off the truck. If it's a third fire alarm you went to for the day, great. It's good practice. It's muscle memory. So when the working fire comes in at 2 a.m, you're going to grab that camera and have it with you and utilize it. So how do we attach the camera to ourselves? This is my younger brother. If you notice, this particular camera has a carabiner and it has a retractable lanyard. I asked him, without any input or anything from me, I said, hey, attach yourself to this camera. Show me how you would do it. And this is how he did it. And I think it's pretty common. I don't like how it's down here on his hip. And the reason why is, if he's crawling around, it's away from him. It could snag on something and drag. It's nowhere near the core of his body. These things break. They're designed to break if they get a lot of tension on them. So be mindful of those things. I don't like how these are non-locking carabiners. Those are fireman wire trap getters. You might get yourself snagged in that situation there. This was one that we had at work a while back on our old cameras. The retractable was done. It didn't work anymore. It was frayed. We took them out of service. They weren't any good. The one thing here that I try to do with my camera when I'm wearing it, I try to keep it in the core of my body somewhere. If you run MSA air packs, your MSAs have that strap that comes across here. That's an awesome resource to hook your camera to. When the human body gets a nasty hit to the head, what does it do? What your reaction is posturing. You protect the core of your body. It's easy for me to grab things at the core of my body because that's a natural animalistic thing that our body does. So when you're in the heat of the moment, things are going bad, you're going to think like your animalistic mindset. So if you go and put your important things to the core of your body, your radio mic, wire cutters, a knife, your thermal imaging camera, you will be able to grab those things rather quickly. Remember, our materials have changed. Our times have changed. In the 50s, we were using cotton, natural products, and every room was a compartment. 70s, we changed a little bit. Of course, we had shaggy carpet. 90s is when things really started to change. Plastics, the open floor concept. And then now, this is where we're at today. We have pallet walls as decor. Right here is the most natural chimney you'll ever have in a house. Where's everything going? It's going to the top. So be mindful of that. I always look at modern construction, or if you have, old legacy construction. The village that we protect is an older town, and they do modern updates to it. So if you have this pink foam board on the outside, how's that going to burn? Fast and dirty. So be mindful of those things. Use that camera to your advantage. If you have a mulch fire, don't treat it as a bullshit fire, because it could easily get this to light up and you miss it. And then a couple hours later, you have a rockin' attic fire because it shot up the wall and now it's blowing out both gables. Be mindful of these things. We call this the modern balloon frame today, because that fire travels so fast up the wall. We need to stop it from getting into the attic space. Some of our applications: scene size up 360, rapid intervention, search. These are all things that you guys have done before with the thermal imaging camera. What are we doing with the camera for a scene size up? Slicers kind of gets a bad rap in the fire service, but I do like it. Kind of keeps things a little bit organized. We're finding the location of the fire. We're how far along is this thing? Where's it at? Where's it been? Where's the flow path? Where is the fire going? And where's the air coming from? We want to identify those things. Do I need to shut this door, protect this window, whatever it is that is going on? What I really like here, maybe I need to use my camera to figure out where my first line needs to go. It's all part of my decision tactical making. And remember, slicers, size up, locate, isolate, cool from a safe space, quote unquote, extinguish the fire, and then rescue and salvage. But the one thing about slicers you have to remember, these guys you can switch around at any point in time. So if you pull up and you have someone hanging out of a window, you're going to rescue strategies. If you have an attic fire and you got to start pulling ceiling before you start putting water out, you're salvaging. So you can plug those guys in whenever you need to. This was a fire a few years back. Typical size up would be, a 2-story residence, nothing showing from the outside. This was a working fire at one point. But the key thing is when you do your 360, get to the Charlie side. The Charlie side is the most dangerous side of any building. Is this truly a 1-story house? No, I treat it as a 3-story because it's built into a hill. I have the basement, the main floor, and the upstairs. You could almost call this one a 2.5 if you wanted to. If you look right here, this is where the fire was showing itself. We ended up having to go upstairs, pull ceiling, and take care of that. So with that being said, some of the hazards we have in this particular setup was the lines came from the back into the house. And if you were doing your 360 and you wanted to walk through the backyard and you touched the fence, you rode the lightning. Your thermal imaging camera would pick up some of those thermal cues on the fence if it was charged. With the camera, we talked about building layout, fire location, that kind of stuff. So live fire layout at the front door. What does that mean? I pop the front door. I'm getting ready to cross that threshold. I am using my camera to find and identify things that are in place. I'm finding the stairs. I'm finding where the fire is at. You're probably going to see it rather quickly. Is there a victim behind the door? I'm doing a quick sweep. And what's behind the door? There was another living room space right there. So use that thing to your advantage. Give your firefighter that you're getting ready to enter with a line of sight. Give them a point of reference. Take that camera, hold it in front of them, and say, hey, do you see the stairs? Yeah, that's where we're heading to. It makes it faster. It makes it more efficient. Don't do drive-by 360s. Don't sit in your engine driving around unless it's a big industrial complex along those lines. If you can get out and walk, get out and walk and see what's going on with that camera. So this was another fire that we had a few years back. This particular house was cut up and nasty. It was just a weird build. This one I would call a 1.5, 2.5, depending on what side you're at. The biggest thing right here I see are the dormer. The dormer is void spaces. If I hear a 1.5 or 2.5 in a scene size up, this tells me a lot of information. One, I have a lot of void spaces. I have a livable space, most likely, in that half story. I'm looking for an air conditioner in the window up there, those types of things. What's the geometry of the building? The fire is going to follow the geometry. That was one thing I picked up from Chief Joe Prenesti was read the building, read the construction. And this right here, fire travel all day. I'm using the camera to predict where the fire is going. So this was when it was on fire. You can see we had a hell of a time trying to get the void spaces put out and all that stuff. This is actually a hoarder house. So the camera itself is seeing the fire in the dormer, in the void spaces. We're using that to our advantage to start putting water on this thing. We're predicting where it's going. These are stubborn. It's just one of those things. I'm using this tool to my advantage. And then follow the convective currents. We know this thing's following the void spaces. You can see where this roof comes up and meets. It's following that channel. And you can see that it's starting to blow out at the end, at the gables, at the vents. We're using the camera to find that and extinguish it. Doing an attic assessment, make sure we don't have extension going to the attic. Most attic fires with a camera, unless it is rocking, you're going to see that white glow up top. That's where it's going to be. That's going to be your good attic assessment, looking at the vents, making sure that you don't have any thermal cues and they're where the white vents are, where the vents are all white, that's a thermal cue. Those are starting to get heat exposed to them. 360 basement assessments are really important. You can identify the basement fire from the outside kind of quickly with the camera by reading the windows. We can't see through the window, but we can see what's heating up behind the window by the glass. The glass you're not going to see through, but it might start changing colors behind there. The actual window sill itself might start turning a white as hot color, or it might actually turn to a yellow and orange, whatever it might be. This was a basement fire out in the country. It was super cold, windy. It was just terrible, terrible fire. And the basement was fully, it was rocking. And we used the camera to identify the basement fire. Now, with that particular window right here, this was old style glass versus new style glass. Remember, new glass today has got gases inside to insulate it. So that might work to your advantage as well when the gases get warmed up. So this fire where the basement fire was at, this was the day after some building construction. If you guys follow me on social media, I posted a picture of difference between a brick wall and a facade wall. This right here was a house that was built, man, I would say 50s, 60s era out in the country. And not a brick house, nothing along those lines, but it had the brick facade, the brick front. The entire wall and basement burned away. The weight shifted onto the facade wall, and it started to bow out during the fire. So this was a structural collapse issue. This is priority traffic. Stay away from the Bravo side. You know, pay attention to this stuff. Use that camera to your advantage. If it's thick, black, nasty smoke chugging, you can see what's going on through that smoke. 360 size up. Looking at this building here, this was an old farmhouse in the middle of a cornfield. We did a training burn in. Balloon frame construction. Remember, balloon frame, it's open from the basement to the attic space. Windows are in line, you know, all that stuff. If you have a fire, the fire is everywhere. So doing our 360 size up, we're walking around. We can see it with our human eye. We're going to take the thermal eye and overlap these things to make a tactical decision. So we see smoke showing, all that good stuff. It's safe to say the fire's in that room right now. So we're going to flip over to the thermal eye here in a second, and we're just taking the information and reconfirming what we already know. And this is all happening rather quickly for that 360 size up. You know, are there any signs of a basement fire? No, the wall looks clean. It didn't shoot up. The attic looks clean, but man, that room, there's some heat building up in there. I'm safe to say that's the room that's on fire, right? Let's take it one step further. Is the attic space getting compromised? Yeah, that soffit looks like it's melting. Yeah, there's a lot of heat source coming out of there. Maybe it's starting to extend a little bit. Maybe this is the point where, guys, the fire's upstairs to the left. Find the stairs quickly. They make the push up and get it. Maybe you do the transitional attack from the outside, whatever you dictate to do. So we're finishing 360. We come back. You know, what's our smoke doing? Our volume, velocity, density, color, better or worse? Are always the questions you want to ask. This situation here, let's just say it's getting worse. So we're scanning again. Man, that soffit looks bad. This window over here is starting to peel. Maybe our heat's transferring down the hallway. That room is starting to get heated up. As we look with the camera, we're seeing where the fire's at and where it wants to be. That whole soffit window starting to get warm. Remember the first time we looked at it, it didn't look like that. And here's that front window. So the fire is extending, it's moving, and it's safe to say we're starting to compromise this bedroom with the camera flipping sensitivity modes in the front yard. That's a 360 size up with your thermal imaging camera. We can also do an interior size up. The glow around the doorway, around a window, that's called thermal bridging. The heat is transferring to the casing and it's telling us what's going on. You can see the convective currents that are starting to spew out of there. And we can kind of get an idea of what's going to come at us when we open this door. Utility hazards. This was we got called for a basement full of water, and she just needed some help mitigating that. So single story residence, nothing shown from the outside. You know, we're on a basement. The scene size up 360, all that good stuff, right? Basement signs, windows are right here. We go down to the basement and it's full of water. All right. So what's some of our signs and symptoms of what's going on? Bad pump, something backed up, you know, whatever it might be. You know, would this be, I guess my question is would this be a call where you would bring the thermal imaging camera? It's a service call. You know, oh, dang it, man, I got to go down and do this. You know, you're kind of like, whatever. The sump pump was still active and still running, and the water around it was heated up. So is that water charged with electricity? You know, those are the questions that I was asking in this scenario here. You know, these are the things you need to prepare yourself for. So don't get caught up in the service calls. You know, they have hazards as well. You're going to send your guys and walk through that water. You know, that might be something you rethink if you see that. We talked about basement fires and attacks and things like that. The only windows in this house for the basement was right here on the Bravo side of the house. How much water are you going to get into the basement for a decent basement fire with all the contents? You know, think about what my water's doing. Think about, you know, what are some other options that we might have in the thought process. I'm not going to get into a search too much. There's a lot of information, a lot of other groups that are out there. Chief Andy Starnes with Insight Training does a great thermal imaging class. That's who I learned from. You can look him up on there. These are some of the statistics websites that you can research to get data that you would use for confirming what we've already known. The biggest thing with searching with an imager is be on the same page as a crew, have good communication, and understand what the end goal is. You don't want to you want to be thorough, but you don't want to waste time inside of there. We talked about scanning appropriately, you know, up, down, to the left, to the right, behind you. The biggest one is behind you. That's a big deal. You know, this is a room of my wife's cousin's kid room. Yeah, that's a tongue twister. You know, looking at this bedroom, you know, it's clean. You know, they don't have a messy room, nothing like that. You know, if I'm going to search this room, what am I looking for? Looking for the bed. I'm looking for, you know, signs of life, things like that. Rooms ain't always like this. You know, college kids, bad part of town, things like that. So we have to still search because you might miss them because they're underneath a blanket or something crazy like that. You know, did I see the crib right away? Did I see the changing station? Those types of things. Crib dumps is something that I become passionate about, and the reason why is it just makes sense, right? So if you find the crib, you know, if you're in the superheated environment and we grab the kid and we scoop them up and stand, we just defeated the entire purpose of protecting them and protecting their airway, because now they're in the thermal layering. They're in the environment we're trying to prevent them to be in. So bring the crib to you. It's called the crib dump. Find the crib, pull it down. The child or whoever will be in the blankets and that things. You can feel their weight. You scoop them up, and then we're going down range or getting out the window that we came in. The other thing with the camera is, what's the convective currents doing? Are they moving towards the rooms we're trying to search? How quickly can I find that crib and go straight to it? Tell my partner, hey, the crib's right over here, line of sight, put the camera in front of his face, and now he's staring at it. Blankets will cover you. They will mask. This is my younger brother. If you don't know, I use my family a lot for demonstrations. So Jack is getting ready to go to bed. He throws the blanket over himself, and guess what? He disappears. He gone. Now, with him being an active emitter, at some point in time, his thermal energy will bleed through the blanket. Yes, but he takes a deep breath of superheated gases. He goes into cardiac arrest, something along those lines. Are you going to see those his thermal cues? No, you're not. So we have to search beds. We have to search bunk beds. Get on top of those things. Scanning dirty is the idea of taking my camera and doing a gangster grip, turning it over to the side. I changed my field of view. This picture here, I wasn't able to see from the ceiling to the floor. I changed my camera and how I was holding it, and now I'm able to see the entire view. This could be the difference between scanning a room and missing the victim in the doorway, scanning the room and I see the victim in the doorway. NFPA, understand your turnout gear. When they do your gear and they get certified, they do over 70 tests. The specs you need to pay attention to is how well can this thing protect me from heat, and how long does it keep heat inside of my gear. These are two things that they fight against each other. Yes, I want the best thermal protection, but firefighters are dying from heart attacks on scenes as well. So what's the happy medium in that? That is something that a lot of firefighters don't know or understand, is that thermal protection performance and total heat loss. This agency here, Williamsport, over in Pennsylvania, they had a close call. It was an old style house, balloon frame. They had the wind shifted and it caused a blowtorch effect. You guys can see how nasty the fire was. This is what their gear looked like. You know, the limitations of your gear. We cannot use our ears tingling a little bit in today's fire service and say, man, this room's hot. We can't rely on that. Our gear is so good, 500 some degrees, and it starts to degrade. You know, at what point do we understand that, hey, we're too saturated with heat? We are part of the problem. We're starting to off gas ourselves. The convective currents are preheating the hallway. We're already preheated. Guess what? A violent fire event occurs. We're game over. And look at their imager. Do you think that one shut down and got overheated? It probably did. The weakest link of any gear that's a line of duty death I highly recommend reading is the face piece. And if you guys know, if you've updated your air packs, they changed the lens that's in place. You know, went from the 275 to 300 degree failure rate to the 500 some degrees. And this is the face piece study. They test all these at 15 kilowatts. Kilowatts was the energy of the fire that was being produced, and the convective currents, and they're moving air and all that good stuff. At 20 kilowatts, which is basically essentially a flashover, was when we started to note that things were failing at a faster rate. So the information is out there. You have to go out and find it, but we have to protect the weakest link of our face piece, and that's, or the weakest link of our gear, which is our face piece, and that is knowing the environment we're working in and having some type of barrier, which is high quality H2O most of the time. So using the camera, I'm reading details. I'm reading convective currents, how fast are the gases moving, how much color is in the room. As you can see, this entire room is halfway down to yellow, the neutral plane. The easy way to tell if my room is halfway neutral plane, use doorknobs to your advantage. Most of the time, doorknobs are halfway on the door. I'm going to use that to my decision-making process. If I see red, that means fire. But the biggest thing in this video, it doesn't take much water in this to make the yellow go away, but look how quickly it comes back. Because we didn't extinguish, we didn't cool the entire environment. This is why line placement, understanding how much water we're throwing out of our nozzles, the 7/8 smoothbore, 160 gallons a minute at 50 PSI, you know, all this stuff comes into play. Transitional attack, the angle of my stream that's coming in, how well am I dispersing the pattern? Did I cool the contents of the room? How fast is it going to rebound? These are all the things my camera is telling me in a quick instance. Stream direction. This was a basement type fire, and I held the camera in front of my partner's face so he could see where the line needed to go. Hey man, bring your line down and seal the door off. If you notice, once we get water into the door, it's sealed. The gases are they're done moving. It's holding the fire in check. And if I move my line over to the left or over to the right, the fire would flare right back up. I'm telling my partner to erase the heat. And that's the biggest thing about this thermal imaging camera is you are Picasso, paint that whole room black. That's what the water's for. Cool the surface down. Always check the wall behind you. The reason being for this, if we push down a hallway and we get into a bedroom and we start putting a decent knock into the room, we only spray a few walls, the one that's in front of us, the one that's to the side, to the other side, and above us, and probably the floor. But say something happens downrange in the hallway or whatever it might be, this back wall is still that 630 degrees. It's still superheated and pre-charged. It might be ready to light off behind you and you don't realize it. So always take that nozzle and spin your hip around and try and spray the header of the door and cool that down as well. That's the one spot we miss. You can see these convective currents are pushing down and into the can where where we kept our crib at. But we want to try and cool that wall behind us as well so we don't get ourselves caught in a pinch. You know, make sure you're not in the flow path of the fire. How do I know what the flow path is? Well, that's where the convective gases are quickly moving through. You can see here the flow path is obviously the doorway. Stay out of the ways. Chief Nick Martin just published this the other day. Stay out of the doorways, stay out of the stairways, stay out of the hallways. Those where fire travel is. If you're in that environment, be quick, be diligent, and have water to put it out. This neutral plane is dropping on the guys quickly. That's in place. I can see the convective currents moving just below the neutral plane. And you can see how violent and how fast this fire is progressing just by the information on the camera as well. If you notice your firefighters, they're kind of blending into the background as well. They're absorbing heat themselves. How much heat are they absorbing? At some point in their gear, they're going to start feeling it. That's too late. That is way too late. Because if you have a flash over here, these guys are already preheated and they're getting those second-degree burns and maybe a lot worse, depending how close they are to the violent fire event. Remember, red means run. That's you have active fire coming at you, and this thing's very close to coming out that door. Now, mind you, these are training burns. You know, it is what it is. You're trying to get the best of the best bang for their buck as students. But still being safe as you're doing it. If you're a fire instructor, or you find yourself in a situation in a hallway, use the wall by the doorway to your advantage. Don't sit in the funnel. And you can see here how violent this room just changed all through the imager. Talking about some RIT, all this information here came from Project Mayday. The biggest one that just blows my mind, we did not do a 360 at all, 57%. Just, we have to be doing 360s on all of our fires. We have to use the thermal imaging camera along with our 360 to quickly identify flow paths, things like that, that whole slicer's algorithm. If you're not carrying wire cutters in your RIT gear, you need to after this class. Please do that. Because what the camera is going to do, if you're able to get a hold of it, it might stop you from cutting your air line from your regulator, from your high stage regulator to your low stage regulator, and we're not destroying our face piece or anything like that. Remember, our firefighters are going to be in weird spaces because we're going into the fire looking for people. If you might have debris on top of them and that kind of stuff. One thing I'm doing with my camera for a RIT assessment is my face piece in place. Yes. Do I see the black hose line or a black air bottle? Yes. That tells me they're breathing because they're moving air as the insulator. If they are not, they're going to start blending into the environment. The next thing I'm looking for is the waist strap connected. If it is not, and I can see that, I'm not even wasting my time with it. I'm going to do something else to do a harness conversion, or I might just grab some webbing and yank and go. So I'm doing that quick assessment. I'm able to see what's going on with that firefighter. If their face piece is off, I know I got to do a switch. I know, if they're breathing or not, what the thermal insult is on top of them. Again, I'm looking at the air bottle, the airline, the SCBA, and then is the waist strap connected? If it is not, the game over. I'm doing another technique for a firefighter removal. So just some still shots of those examples there. Common mistakes we make, we rely solely on the camera. Remember, we have to use what God gave us, our human sight and our sense of feeling. Don't stray too far from your crews. Communication is very difficult. A really good drill to do is have people describe things with the camera in a dark room. Your sense of your depth perception is way off with the camera as well. You know, it's really hard to be the guy that can see everything and trying to tell people, hey, go to the left, go to the left, go to the right. You know, it's kind of hard to do that. With the camera, if you have line of sight, sometimes it screws you up and you just stand up. That can be a training thing to work on as well. Remember, peripheral vision, your depth perception is way off. The biggest one here, we're not clearing condensation off of the lens of the camera. So if you have a dirty face piece, you have a dirty camera. You need to clean it off. This is an example of condensation, soot, crap that builds up on the geranium lens. What happens is it stops infrared from coming into the camera. It's a block. So now the camera is not producing a very clear image. And you can really see the difference in this video. So right now, I don't have a very clean image being produced. I have convective currents. You know, I know there's an active fire near me. I'm looking over. I look, you know, it's blurry. There's not very good detail. You guys have seen in the past how good is my camera switch sensitivity modes, but I'm not seeing any differences in anything. This looks like crap. I can barely see my partner. You know, I swoop back and forth trying to figure out what's going on. Why is this thing producing the image it's producing? Convective currents look like a white cloud going above my head. And then I finally realized, hey, I should probably wipe my face piece and my thermal imaging camera. You can hardly see your partner. Partner's blending in the background. And then I wipe the camera. Maybe. There's the crib. You guys remember that crib we were looking at? Same camera. Can hardly see it. So then I wipe the lens and look at the difference you just created. Now I'm bringing in, you know, a cleaner image, all from condensation that was built up onto the tick. So if you have a dirty face piece, you have a dirty imager, you need to clean it with a dirty glove because that's the cleanest thing we have to wipe something off with. Where's the hole in the floor? This was the basement fire where the floor was completely gone. I am looking. There's the hallway that was somewhat in place, and then there's the hole to the basement. So use the camera to try and find these things. Use the stream to create contrast if you need to, and see if that floor is even intact. Again, make sure that you guys read your owner's manuals, you know, those types of things. I have a special credit to my wife. She sacrifices a lot for me to do these classes, and she's a trooper. She's always my guinea pig for projects, things like that. Like I said, Chief Starnes is a big influencer for me on thermal imaging cameras, operations, things like that. He is a part of Kill the Flashover, which was a group that created some studies for fire service thermal imaging cameras, fire tac ideas. Joe, I can never say his last name, DeVito. I just call him Joey. Big part of thermal imaging world as well. Chris Kessinger, Napoleon Fire Department, my employer, American Township, FLIR, MSA Bullard, UL, all those guys. And then my three dudes, Chief Prenesti, Corey Stroup down in Xenia, and Jeff Rosenkrantz are guys that help teach with me, and we all have a good time with it.